So I want to talk about the Jinhao 991, and this is a pen that I've actually been meaning to talk about for quite some time, and the reason why I haven't actually gotten around to talk about it is pretty much because when I review a fountain pen, I'll usually get it and I'll try to use it on a regular basis for about 5 to 6 weeks, maybe even longer, just so I'm confident that I know everything about this fountain pen that's relevant to a review. Now, I ordered this fountain pen back in March or April. That is a really long time ago, and I've had this pen sitting around ever since. And I've been meaning to talk about it, but I've never been able to use it for a long enough period of time where I felt comfortable to go ahead and review it. And the reason being is this is a stupidly boring pen to use, and every time I try to use this fountain pen, I just get really bored. I don't really feel like using it, and I just pop it away, and it ends up sitting in my drawer for the next 5 weeks. So it's been quite a few months, so I think it's just gotten to the point where I should just go ahead and make the review. Now, I've got to say, there's nothing wrong with this pen. This pen's nib is alright, this pen is comfortable to hold. It's just incredibly boring to hold. And I know this pen only costs around about $2, so I don't expect all that much from this fountain pen. But considering that this is part of the Jinhao 900 series pens, which were a huge step up in what Jinhao were producing from their fountain pens, because the Jinhao 993, the shark pen, that was a beautiful pen. The 911 was an awesome metal body fountain pen, and the 992 employed better nibs than any other Jinhao that I've seen before. Those pens were awesome, so it's just a shame that this pen sort of is letting the whole Jinhao 900 series pens down. And as well as that, this is a $2 pen, but for $2 you can also get other good Chinese pens, such as the Wingsung 6359 or the Wingsung 3008. So let's just jump into the review of the Jinhao 991. And first of all, let's start with the specs. So capped, this pen is 139mm long. Uncapped, it's 127mm long. Posted, it's 158mm long. And the diameter of this pen is around about 8 to 9mm in diameter. So this is a crazy thin fountain pen. And in terms of the weight, we're looking at about a pen that's 12 grams posted and 7 grams uncapped. So this is a very light pen indeed. And in terms of the ergonomics, I have to say, this pen's specs are really similar to one of your generic rollable pens. And those are pens that I used pretty much exclusively before I used fountain pens, and the ergonomics are really similar and really familiar. Normally a pen this slim would be a little bit uncomfortable to use, but because I remember using these pens so often, it really isn't all that uncomfortable for me to use. Yes, this is a very slim pen and I don't feel like using it for extended periods of time, but for just jotting down simple notes, it's not all that bad. But for most people, I think the diameter is just going to be a little bit too slim. In terms of the length is pretty nice. This pen is usable, but it isn't terribly nice to use, and it just sort of takes the joy out of writing. In terms of the aesthetics, I got to mark it down greatly on the aesthetics because, as I said, the aesthetics are pretty much based, as well as the ergonomics, are based on a rollable pen, which makes it incredibly dull to look at. And here's the thing, I don't need every one of my fountain pens to look like a Mont Blanc or a Visconti Homo Sapiens or a Visconti, watermark. But I do like my fountain pen to look a little bit nicer than your regular pen because fountain pens are awesome. It's always nice to whip off the cap and see this lovely nib. So it's also nice to make your fountain pen stand out just a little bit. The next thing I want to talk about is the material and build quality. Now, the build quality for Jinhao's is pretty good as of late, and this pen is no exception. If I was to pick up this pen and say a Uniball rollable pen, I'd say that the quality is pretty much on par. The new Jinhao pens have been really nicely built. They're obviously using new molds, and the step up in quality is showing in the quality of their pens. However, the material that they've used in this pen is a little bit worse than other Jinhao pens. I don't think this is the same plastic that they've used in the Jinhao 992. The 992 obviously uses some form of ABS. It's a very, very nice plastic. It is very, very strong and actually pretty scratch resistant. This pen, however, uses a much lighter, a much more frosted over type of plastic, and it's a little bit more, I guess springy is the right way to talk about it. Now this pen here just doesn't feel as well put together when you pick it up as the 992, but it still feels really nicely. And in my time of using this pen, it's actually resisted scratches better than the Jinhao 992, but the only reason why it actually has resisted scratches better than the 992 is just because that this pen has a frosted finish to it, whereas the 992 has the clear finish, which obviously means that scratches are going to be much more hidden on this frosted surface. Taking a look at the threads of the fountain pen, if we unscrew the back of the fountain pen, you can see that this pen has plastic threads. Now the good thing is the actual thickness of the threads is increased compared to older Jinhao fountain pens, such as the 599, which easily broke when you applied pressure. However, these threads are a lot thicker, which means that you can apply quite a fair amount of pressure and you won't have to worry about it breaking. As well as that, there are quite a lot of threads. I think the pitch is about 7 or 8, which is really good. So you can apply a bit of silicone grease and eyedrop this fountain pen with no worry about the pen leaking, which is really good. And mentioning eyedropping the pen, because it is a plastic threaded fountain pen and because the back is plastic and there aren't any holes, this pen is easily one of the best fountain pens to be able to eyedrop from the get-go, which is really good. And if I do use this fountain pen again, I would probably eyedrop it because this pen is so light. I think the extra 1 or 2 grams from eyedropping this pen would make it a little bit more comfortable to use in the long run. When you get this fountain pen, you will also get included a Jinhao Standard International converter, and these converters are pretty good. Of the 20-30 plus pens I've gotten from Jinhao over the years, I've only had one converter break on me, which is really good. I like these converters, they're very reliable, they're all interchangeable with Jinhao pens, and they're free. So let's talk about the nib of this fountain pen. So the Jinhao 991 uses the improved, revised Jinhao No. 5 nib, and the thing that really separates the revised nib that you find on this pen, the 992, from older Jinhaos, such as the older Jinhao 599s, is that the new nibs are using much bigger balls of tipping on the tip of the fountain pen, and as well as that, they've obviously changed the way that they grind their fountain pens, and that is showing because a lot of the newer Jinhao fountain pens that I get aren't plagued with the old skipping issues or the scratchy issues that I was getting with a lot of the older Jinhao fountain pens, and that is really good considering that these are mass-produced pens from China and they're probably not using the highest quality molds in the world. Like I said, this is the same nib that I found on my 992s, and it is pretty much identical. This one here has the fine nib on it, and it is pretty much average for what you would expect a fine nib to be. It's not super fine and it's not super wide. It's pretty much the same width as my Pilot's medium nib. I have to say it is a really nice width. Now in terms of the grinding, they have ground it well for a mass-produced $2 pen. The pen isn't scratchy at all, but it isn't buttery smooth. It's, to say it in a nice way, it is probably a really big step up from a ballpoint pen. It is certainly better than a ballpoint pen. It's much nicer to use than a rollerball, but it obviously isn't a Wing Sung 3008, and it obviously isn't going to be a Mont Blanc. Alright then, welcome to the writing sample for the Jinhao. This is the 991, which has a fine nib. The ink that I'm using is Robert Oster Australian Sky Blue. This is the ink that I got at the Sydney Pen Show a few weeks back, and unfortunately I actually haven't had all that much time to use this ink, so I'm not terribly familiar with the characteristics of the ink at the moment. The paper that I'm using obviously is Rhodia. This is the, 80 GSM, blank pad. Let's go to quick writing sample data. And as you can clearly see from that writing sample, there wasn't any issues at all. There wasn't any skipping, and you might hear from the writing sample, there actually isn't all that much scratch from this pen. It's not buttery smooth, but it is pretty good. The ink was pretty consistent. There was a little bit of shading, but the ink flow was pretty consistent. It might even be on the dry side. In terms of fast writing, I'll do it here. This pen obviously can keep up with quick bursts of fast writing, and I'll also point out that in both of these writing samples there isn't really any line variation at all. Taking a look at line variation, this is the nib without any pressure, and this is slowly building up pressure. And the only thing that really happens when you do put more pressure on the nib is there's going to be more ink coming out of the slit, but apart from that there really isn't any change to the line width. So this is no pressure, and this is as much pressure as I'd want to put. And as you can see, not much ink and a lot more ink. In terms of actually trying to see the flex, well, quote flex, you're not actually going to get flex, but you will see that the parts where I have pushed down a little bit harder, it's a little bit darker, and that might be a lot nicer if you have an ink that shades really well, such as the ink that I'm using. In terms of wetness, I think this pen is average for a fine nib. It is a fine nib, so I'm not expecting it to be a gusher or anything like that. In terms of reverse writing, Chinese pens seem to do pretty well for reverse writing. And this pen really is no exception. It writes alright with reverse writing, though it's still pretty scratchy, and I wouldn't want to use it all the time for reverse writing. And I think that pretty much... Oh, one last thing I will show you is, in terms of natural line variation, due to the way that's been ground, there actually is a little bit of natural line variation. The side strokes seem to have a little bit more of a grind, a little bit thinner of a grind than the side strokes, but for everyday writing I don't think you're going to notice it all that much. And I think that's pretty much it for the writing sample. Alright then, conclusion time. What do I have to say? Well, first of all, I have to say I am pretty disappointed with the Jinhao 991. The Jinhao 900 series pens brought a lot to the table. They were a huge step up for Jinhao, and I was really expecting a lot from the Jinhao 991, but unfortunately it has just fallen short compared to the other Jinhao 900 series pens. And that means if I am going to recommend a Jinhao fountain pen, go ahead, skip this fountain pen and go and get the Jinhao 992. The Jinhao 992 costs pretty much the same as this pen here, but for that you're going to get a pen that feels a lot nicer. It feels that it's built a lot nicer using much better materials, it looks a lot nicer, and it is much more comfortable. I don't really see any reason why you would want to get this pen. It's not terribly comfortable to hold, it is ugly. I just don't see why you would go ahead and buy this pen. So Jinhao has done a great job for the Jinhao 900 series pens, but unfortunately this pen I don't see much use in buying, so Jinhao might want to rethink this one. Anyway, it's nice to be back. Thank you all for watching. Hope you enjoyed.